My name is Dr. Helena Marlowe, and I've spent the last 15 years building systems that protect this nation's most critical infrastructure. At 38, I've architected security protocols that have stopped more cyber attacks than most people will ever know about. I don't seek recognition. I don't crave applause. I simply do what needs to be done, in the shadows where the real work happens. The morning that changed everything started like any other. I arrived at Stratonet Defense Systems at 6:47 a.m., as I had every weekday for the past 8 years. The security guard, Marcus, nodded as I badged in. He'd stopped checking my credentials years ago. Everyone knew who I was, even if they didn't fully understand what I did. My office occupied a corner of the 7th floor. Though calling it an office was generous, it was more of a command center, with 6 monitors displaying real-time threat assessments, system diagnostics, and encrypted communications from various defense contractors. The walls were bare except for a single framed photo of the original ARPANET team. No diplomas, no awards, no ego wall. Those things meant nothing in my world. I had just settled into my morning routine when the company-wide meeting notification appeared on my screen. Mandatory attendance, conference room A, 9:00 a.m. sharp. The sender was Tessa Rayburn, our new CEO who'd been brought in 3 months ago to modernize Stratonet's approach to defense contracting. Tessa came from the Silicon Valley startup world, where she'd made her fortune disrupting industries that had nothing to do with national security. She spoke in buzzwords and viewed everything through the lens of quarterly earnings. In our few interactions, she'd made it clear she thought our department was bloated, outdated, and ripe for restructuring. I continued working until 8:55, then made my way to the conference room. The space was already packed with employees from every department. The energy was nervous, electric. People whispered about layoffs, reorganizations, pivots to commercial markets. I found a seat near the back and opened my secure phone, monitoring Sentinel Core's status indicators while I waited. Sentinel Core was my creation, my legacy. It wasn't just another security system. It was a living, breathing neural network that protected 17 Department of Defense data centers across the country. The system learned from every attack, evolved with every threat, and had achieved something unprecedented in cybersecurity: 0 successful breaches in 4 years of operation. The contract with DoD was worth $890 million over 10 years, with performance bonuses that had made Stratonet one of the most profitable defense contractors in the Mid-Atlantic region. What Tessa didn't understand was that the contract wasn't really with Stratonet. It was with the system I'd built, and by extension, with me. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Tessa strode into the room wearing a black power suit and red-soled heels that clicked against the floor like a countdown. She was 45, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of aggressive confidence that played well in boardrooms but poorly in server rooms. "Good morning, Stratonet family," she began, her voice carrying the false warmth of someone who'd learned empathy from a management seminar. "I want to thank you all for being here today as we discuss our exciting new direction." She launched into a presentation filled with graphs showing declining profit margins, missed opportunities in commercial AI, and what she called legacy thinking that was holding the company back. I watched my colleagues' faces fall as she outlined her vision for a leaner, more agile Stratonet that would compete with tech giants for consumer contracts. "Which brings me to the restructuring," Tessa said, clicking to a slide titled Organizational Optimization. "Effective immediately. We'll be consolidating several departments and eliminating redundancies. I know change is difficult, but I promise you, this is necessary for our survival." She began reading names: senior engineers who'd been with the company for decades, project managers who understood the intricate dance of government contracting, technical writers who could translate complex systems into documentation that actually made sense. With each name, the room grew quieter, more tense. "And finally," Tessa said, her eyes finding me in the back of the room, "Dr. Helena Marlowe." The room turned to stare. Someone gasped. I heard whispers of, "But she's Sentinel Core," and "They can't be serious." Tessa's smile was razor sharp. Dr. Marlowe has served this company well, but her approach to security architecture is, frankly, obsolete. We need fresh perspectives, modern methodologies, AI-driven solutions that don't require a single point of failure. Single point of failure. She had no idea what she'd just said. I stood slowly, every eye in the room following my movement. May I ask a question? Of course, Tessa said, her tone suggesting she'd been expecting resistance. Have you reviewed the technical specifications of our DoD contracts? I've reviewed the financial aspects thoroughly. That wasn't my question. Her smile faltered slightly. The technical details are the purview of our engineering teams. What matters is the bottom line. The bottom line, I said, keeping my voice level, is that you've just announced the termination of the only person with full administrative access to a system protecting 17 critical defense installations. Access can be transferred, she said dismissively. No one is irreplaceable. Dr. Marlowe. I pulled out my phone and opened an app that most people would mistake for a calendar. In reality, it was Sentinel Core's biometric interface, responding only to my fingerprint, retinal scan, and behavioral patterns. A few swipes confirmed what I already knew would happen. You're right, I said. No one is irreplaceable, but some systems are designed to recognize when they've been compromised. Is that a threat? It's a statement of fact. Sentinel Core isn't just software. It's a living system that monitors for unauthorized changes to its core architecture. Removing its primary architect without proper transition protocols triggers security measures that can't be overridden. The room had gone completely silent. Even the HVAC system seemed to pause, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Tessa laughed, actually laughed. This is exactly the kind of outdated thinking I'm talking about. Creating dependencies on individuals instead of scalable systems. Clean out your office, Dr. Marlowe. Security will escort you out within the hour. I nodded once and left the room without another word. Behind me, I heard Tessa resume her presentation, assuring everyone that the transition would be smooth, that our clients wouldn't even notice the change. She had no idea what she'd just set in motion. I returned to my office and began the process I'd hoped I'd never have to implement. First, I gathered the 3 physical notebooks containing the handwritten algorithms that formed Sentinel Core's deepest logic layers. These had never been digitized, never been backed up, never been shared. They existed only in my handwriting, in code that would take even the best cryptographers months to decipher without my guidance. Next, I initiated a secure communication protocol with my contact at the Pentagon. Colonel Sarah Chen had been my liaison for the past 4 years, one of the few people who understood not just what Sentinel Core did, but how it did it. Helena, she answered on the first ring. I wasn't expecting to hear from you today. There's been a development, I said, watching as security approached my office. Stratonet just terminated my employment. Silence. Then they did what? You'll want to schedule an emergency security review immediately. Helena, what's going to happen to the system? Exactly what it was designed to do when it detects a potential breach. It's going to protect itself. 2 security guards appeared in my doorway. They were apologetic but firm. I had 15 minutes to pack my personal belongings. I took only the notebooks and a small cactus that had somehow survived 7 years of artificial light. Everything else belonged to Stratonet, or so they thought. As they escorted me through the building, I saw my former colleagues watching from doorways and cubicles. Some looked shocked, others angry. A few seemed relieved that their own names hadn't been called. In the elevator, one of the security guards, a young man named David who'd always been friendly, whispered, "This isn't right, Dr. Marlowe." "No," I agreed. "It's not." The walk through the lobby felt longer than usual. My badge was deactivated at the security desk. My parking pass confiscated. They even wanted to check my notebooks. But I pointed out that personal journals weren't company property. They let me keep them, not realizing they just allowed me to walk out with the keys to the kingdom. I sat in my car for a moment, watching the building that had been my second home for 8 years. Then I drove away, knowing that in approximately 6 hours, Tessa Rayburn would begin to understand the magnitude of her decision. The first signs appeared that afternoon. I was at home, sitting in my study with a cup of tea, when my secure phone buzzed with an automated alert. Sentinel Corps had detected an unauthorized access attempt at Terminal 7. The system had responded by incrementally tightening its security protocols, requiring additional authentication that only I could provide. By evening, the alerts were coming every few minutes. Each attempted override triggered a deeper lockdown. The system was behaving exactly as I designed it to, protecting itself and the critical infrastructure it guarded from what it perceived as a coordinated attack. At 9:17 p.m., Colonel Chen called. "Helena, we have a situation." "I'm aware." "No, I don't think you are. Sentinel Corps isn't just locking out Stratonet personnel. It started quarantining data flows from their entire network. We're getting alerts from installations across the country. The Joint Chiefs are asking questions I can't answer." "The system is protecting itself from a compromised operator," I explained. "Stratonet severed the authorized command structure without following proper protocols. From Sentinel Corps' perspective, the company has been infiltrated." "Can you fix this?" "Of course, but I no longer work for Stratonet." Sarah swore creatively. "This is going to escalate quickly. Can you come to the Pentagon tomorrow?" "I'll clear my schedule," I said dryly. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because I took pleasure in chaos, but because I knew my system was doing exactly what it should, protecting itself, protecting the data, protecting the nation, even if it meant protecting them from the very company that had contracted to run it. The next morning, I dressed carefully, not in the casual clothes I usually wore to the office, but in a charcoal suit I'd bought years ago for congressional testimony. If I was going to walk into the Pentagon as a private citizen, I would look the part. The security protocols at the Pentagon were extensive but efficient. Colonel Chen met me at the visitor center, her usually composed face showing signs of a sleepless night. "It's worse than we discussed," she said as we walked through corridors that all looked identical to the untrained eye. "Stratonet's entire executive team has been in crisis mode since midnight. They've had to notify 17 installations that their security systems are non-responsive." "Non-responsive is inaccurate," I corrected. "The systems are highly responsive. They're just not responding to unauthorized users." We entered a secure conference room where a dozen officials were already assembled. I recognized faces from the Defense Information Systems Agency, the National Security Agency, and at least 2 people whose affiliations were classified above my clearance level. General Patricia Hayes, Deputy Director of DISA, didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Dr. Marlowe, can you explain why millions of dollars in defense infrastructure is currently operating outside of our control?" I took a seat and opened one of my notebooks. "With respect, General, the infrastructure is operating exactly as specified in the original contract. Page 247, subsection 18.3.2. In the event of detected compromise of operating personnel, Sentinel Corps shall implement progressive security measures to prevent unauthorized access to critical systems." "Firing an employee isn't a compromise," someone said. "The system doesn't distinguish between termination and compromise when proper transition protocols aren't followed. I've spent 4 years teaching it to recognize and respond to insider threats. From its perspective, the sudden removal of its primary architect while attempting to maintain unauthorized access is textbook hostile action." General Hayes leaned forward. "What do you need to restore normal operations?" "Reinstatement of my administrative privileges and proper authentication from Stratonet systems. The company needs to acknowledge me as the authorized operator." "They terminated you yesterday." "Then they have a problem." The room erupted in discussion. Legal ramifications, contract violations, national security implications. I sat quietly, occasionally consulting my notebooks when technical questions arose. This wasn't my crisis. I'd built the system to specifications, documented everything meticulously, and warned them repeatedly about the importance of proper succession planning. After an hour of circular debate, Colonel Chen asked the question that mattered. "Dr. Marlowe, what happens if we can't resolve this quickly?" I chose my words carefully. Sentinel Corps' protection protocols escalate based on perceived threat duration. We're currently at Level 2. If unauthorized access attempts continue, it will progress to Level 3 within 72 hours. What happens at Level 3? The system begins migrating critical data to secure partitions and implements rolling encryption on all stored information. Essentially, it starts preparing for a siege. And Level 4. There is no Level 4. Level 3 is designed to maintain indefinitely until proper authorization is restored. General Hayes stood abruptly. Get Stratonet's CEO on the line, now. The video conference with Tessa Rayburn was painful to watch. She appeared on screen from Stratonet's boardroom, flanked by lawyers and looking significantly less composed than she had yesterday morning. Her perfect hair showed signs of distress, and her blazer was wrinkled. "This is extortion," she began before anyone else could speak. "Dr. Marlowe has sabotaged critical defense systems in retaliation for her termination." "I've done nothing," I said calmly. "The system is operating as designed and documented. You removed its primary architect without following the transition protocols outlined in sections 12 through 15 of the operational manual. No one told me about any protocols. Did you read the technical documentation before restructuring the department responsible for a $890 million contract?" Her silence was answer enough. General Hayes took control. "Ms. Rayburn, the Department of Defense takes system security very seriously. Your actions have potentially compromised 17 critical installations. We're initiating a full review of Stratonet's contract compliance." "This is ridiculous," Tessa sputtered. "We're a private company. We have the right to manage our personnel as we see fit." "Not when your personnel decisions affect national security," the general replied. "Dr. Marlowe, what's your recommended course of action?" I closed my notebook deliberately. Stratonet has two options. They can reinstate me with full administrative privileges to properly transition the system to new operators. This process will take approximately 3 months to ensure no security gaps. Or they can attempt to maintain operations without me, in which case Sentinel Corps will continue its protective protocols indefinitely. "That's blackmail," Tessa said. "That's the system working as intended," I corrected. "You wanted to eliminate what you called a single point of failure. Congratulations. You've discovered why that point existed in the first place." The meeting continued for another 2 hours, with lawyers debating contract terms and officials discussing contingency plans. I answered technical questions when asked, but otherwise remained silent. This wasn't my problem to solve anymore. As the meeting concluded, General Hayes pulled me aside. "Dr. Marlowe, regardless of how this plays out with Stratonet, we need to discuss your future. The department has been considering establishing an independent oversight body for critical infrastructure security. Someone with your expertise would be invaluable." "I'm listening," I said. "It's still in the planning stages, but we're calling it the Critical Infrastructure Security Initiative, CI. We need someone who understands both the technical and strategic aspects of defense systems, someone who can't be influenced by corporate interests." "When would this position be available?" "That depends partly on how quickly we can resolve the current situation. But I can tell you this, we've learned our lesson about allowing private companies sole control over critical systems." I left the Pentagon that afternoon with a visitor badge and a lot to think about. The crisis wasn't resolved, but the wheels were in motion. Stratonet would either come to its senses or face the consequences of their decision. Either way, I'd done what I always did, protected the system. The next 3 days were a case study in corporate panic. I monitored the situation from my home office, watching as Stratonet's stock price plummeted and news of the security malfunction leaked to defense industry publications. Tessa released carefully worded statements about technical difficulties and temporary system adjustments, but anyone who understood the industry could read between the lines. My phone rang constantly, former colleagues begging for help, reporters fishing for comments, competitors trying to poach me. I ignored them all except for a select few. The engineers who'd worked closely with me on Sentinel Corps, the ones who understood not just the code, but the philosophy behind it, they were collateral damage in Tessa's restructuring. and they deserved better. On the evening of the third day, I was reviewing system logs when an unexpected visitor arrived. Tessa Rayburn stood on my doorstep, looking like she'd aged a year in 72 hours. Her power suit had been replaced by wrinkled business casual, and her perfectly styled hair hung limp around her face. "We need to talk," she said. I could have refused, could have closed the door in her face and let her experience a fraction of the dismissal she'd shown me. Instead, I stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. We sat in my living room, two women who couldn't have been more different in our approaches to power. She perched on the edge of my sofa like she might need to flee at any moment. I settled into my armchair and waited. "The board is furious," she began without preamble. "We've lost 3 major contracts in as many days. The DoD is threatening to terminate our agreement and demand repayment of performance bonuses. Our stock has dropped 30%. I'm aware. How do I fix this?" "You don't," I said simply. "You can't undo a cascade failure by addressing symptoms. You have to fix the root cause." "Which is?" "Your fundamental misunderstanding of what Stratonet actually does. You saw a defense contractor and tried to turn it into a tech startup. You viewed experienced engineers as overhead instead of assets. You dismissed security protocols as outdated thinking instead of hard-won wisdom." She leaned forward, desperation cracking her corporate veneer. "What do you want? Your job back. A raise stock options? Name it." "I don't want anything from you," I said. "My obligation was to the system I built and the people it protects. That obligation didn't end when you terminated me. It simply changed form." "Then why haven't you fixed it?" "Because the system isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it should when faced with a compromised operator. The fact that you still don't understand that proves my point." She stood abruptly, anger flashing across her face. "You're enjoying this, watching me fail." "No," I said quietly. "I'm watching a predictable outcome of poor decision-making. There's no enjoyment in it. Only confirmation of why systems like Sentinel Core need protection from people who don't understand them." She left without another word, slamming my door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. I returned to my logs, noting that Sentinel Core had just entered the early stages of Level 3 protection. Right on schedule. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. General Hayes called at 6 a.m. to inform me that Stratonet's board of directors had called an emergency meeting. By 8 a.m., Tessa Rayburn had been removed as CEO. By 10 a.m., I received a call from Richard Morse, chairman of Stratonet's board. "Dr. Marlowe," he began, his voice heavy with exhaustion and frustration. "On behalf of the board, I want to apologize for the recent decisions regarding your employment. We were misled about the nature of your role and the criticality of your position." "Apologies don't restore system functionality," I said. "No, they don't, which is why I'm calling to offer you immediate reinstatement with a significant increase in compensation and complete autonomy over Sentinel Core operations. I appreciate the offer, but my situation has changed." Silence. Then, carefully, what would it take to resolve this situation? I'd been expecting this call and had prepared my response. Sentinel Core needs stable, informed leadership that understands both its technical requirements and strategic importance. I'm willing to consult during a 3-month transition period to properly hand over operations to a qualified team. However, I won't return to Stratonet as an employee. The Department of Defense won't accept anyone else running the system. Then perhaps it's time to reconsider whether a private corporation should have sole control over critical defense infrastructure. The negotiation that followed was delicate but necessary. I agreed to serve as an independent consultant, bringing in a team of engineers I trusted to gradually assume control of Sentinel Core. Several were former Stratonet employees who'd been caught in Tessa's restructuring. Others were specialists I'd worked with over the years who understood the intersection of security and strategy. The transition began immediately. I returned to Stratonet not as an employee, but as an architect preparing to hand over my blueprint. The building felt different now, charged with the nervous energy of a company that had come close to catastrophe and knew it. My first action was to authenticate with Sentinel Core and begin the gradual rollback of its protective protocols. The system responded to my biometric signature like a guard dog recognizing its handler, immediately downgrading from Level 3 to Level 2. Within hours, normal operations began to resume at defense installations across the country. The relief in the operations center was palpable. Engineers who'd been locked out of their own systems watched as access was restored, data flows resumed, and threat monitoring returned to baseline. Several approached me with questions, eager to understand how the system had so thoroughly defended itself. "It's not complicated," I explained to a group of junior developers. "Sentinel Core treats security as an organic process, not a static set of rules. It learns, adapts, and responds to perceived threats with escalating countermeasures. The key is teaching it to recognize legitimate authority." Over the following weeks, I worked closely with my hand-picked team to document every aspect of the system's architecture. We created detailed transition protocols, established clear chains of command, and built-in safeguards against future disruptions. The process was exhausting but necessary. Colonel Chen visited frequently, observing the transition and discussing the broader implications of what had happened. During one of these visits, she pulled me aside for a private conversation. "The CISI proposal has been fast-tracked," she said. "The Joint Chiefs were impressed by how you handled this situation. They want someone who puts security above corporate interests." "When would it start?" "As soon as your transition here is complete. We're prepared to offer you full autonomy in building the organization, selecting your team, and establishing protocols for critical infrastructure protection." It was everything I'd wanted but never thought possible: the chance to build security systems without corporate interference, to protect critical infrastructure based on need rather than profit margins, to work with engineers who shared my commitment to doing things right. The 3-month transition passed quickly. My team proved more than capable of managing Sentinel Core, having absorbed not just the technical knowledge but the philosophical approach that made the system effective. They understood that security wasn't about building walls, but about creating adaptive, intelligent responses to ever-evolving threats. On my last day as a consultant, Stratanet held a small ceremony in the operations center. Richard Morse presented me with a plaque thanking me for my service, a gesture that felt both hollow and necessary. The engineers I'd trained gave me something more meaningful: a hardbound copy of the complete Sentinel Core documentation, signed by everyone who'd worked on the transition. "You taught us that systems are only as strong as the people who understand them." Maria Rodriguez, the lead engineer who would take over my responsibilities, said, "We won't forget that lesson." I left Stratanet for the final time that afternoon, but I wasn't walking away from my life's work. I was moving towards something larger, more important. The Critical Infrastructure Security Initiative would launch the following Monday with me as its founding director. The organization started small, just a dozen specialists working out of a nondescript office building in Arlington, but we had something more valuable than size purpose. Our mandate was to assess, protect, and improve security systems across all critical infrastructure, from power grids to water treatment facilities to transportation networks. We recruited carefully, looking for engineers who understood that security was a calling, not just a career. Many came from the private sector, frustrated by the constant pressure to prioritize profits over protection. Others were government employees who'd seen too many critical systems compromised by lowest bidder mentality. Within 6 months, CISI had conducted security assessments of 47 critical systems, identifying vulnerabilities that had gone unnoticed for years. We didn't just point out problems. We worked alongside system operators to implement solutions, sharing knowledge and building resilience. The work was challenging but rewarding. Every day brought new puzzles to solve, new threats to anticipate, new ways to strengthen the invisible systems that kept society functioning. We operated without fanfare, without press releases, without the corporate politics that had nearly compromised Sentinel Core. 1 year after leaving Stratanet, I received an unexpected message. It was from David, the security guard who'd escorted me out on that fateful day. He'd left the company shortly after I did. Uncomfortable with the culture that had emerged under Tessa's brief leadership, he was writing to tell me he'd just been accepted into a cybersecurity program, inspired by what he'd witnessed during the Sentinel Corps crisis. "You showed me that one person who understands the system can make all the difference," he wrote. "I want to be that person for something that matters." I smiled, remembering the nervous young man who'd whispered that my termination wasn't right. He'd understood something that Tessa Rayburn never had. Respect for expertise isn't weakness, it's wisdom. CISI continued to grow, not in size, but in influence. We became the quiet voice in the room advocating for security over convenience, for long-term protection over short-term profits. When new systems were proposed, we were there to assess their vulnerabilities. When existing systems failed, we helped rebuild them stronger. The defense industry took notice. Other contractors began adopting our recommended protocols, understanding that another Sentinel Corps incident could end their businesses overnight. Some hired former CIS consultants to help implement better practices. We encouraged this, seeing it as a victory for the larger mission of protecting critical infrastructure. Stratanet survived its near-death experience, though it never fully recovered its previous standing. The company refocused on its core competencies, abandoning Tessa's vision of becoming a commercial tech giant. Under more prudent leadership, they maintained their defense contracts and even expanded into new areas of cybersecurity. I kept tabs on their progress, not out of spite, but out of professional interest. Sentinel Corps continued to perform flawlessly under its new operators, a testament to both the system's design and the quality of the transition. Maria Rodriguez proved to be an excellent steward, maintaining the system's integrity while carefully implementing improvements. Tessa Rayburn disappeared from the defense industry entirely. I heard through professional networks that she'd returned to Silicon Valley, where her aggressive disruption tactics were better suited to companies that could afford to fail fast and pivot. I felt no satisfaction in her departure, only relief that she was no longer in a position to compromise critical systems. 3 years after the crisis, I was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee on infrastructure security. They wanted to understand how a single personnel decision had nearly compromised 17 defense installations and what could be done to prevent similar incidents. I sat before the committee in the same charcoal suit I'd worn to the Pentagon that first morning, my notebooks replaced by tablets containing thousands of pages of documentation and case studies. The representatives listened intently as I explained the delicate balance between innovation and security, between efficiency and resilience. "The fundamental issue," I told them, "is that we've created systems so complex that only a small number of people truly understand them. This isn't a flaw. It's a reality of modern technology. The solution isn't to simplify the systems, but to ensure that the people who understand them are protected, respected, and properly integrated into decision-making processes." One representative asked if I regretted how events had unfolded with Stratanet. "I regret that it was necessary," I replied, "but I don't regret protecting the system. Sentinel Corps was designed to defend critical infrastructure from all threats, internal and external. It did exactly what it was supposed to do." The testimony led to new regulations requiring defense contractors to maintain technical advisory boards with veto power over personnel decisions affecting critical systems. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step toward recognizing that some knowledge couldn't be easily replaced or transferred. Evolved with the changing landscape, adapting our methods to address new threats and vulnerabilities. We developed training programs for the next generation of security architects, passing on not just technical knowledge, but the mindset needed to protect systems that society depended on. I occasionally lectured at universities and defense colleges, sharing lessons learned from decades in the field. Students often asked about the Sentinel Corps incident, curious about the technical details of how one person could lock down such a massive system. "You're asking the wrong question," I would tell them. It's not about how I locked down the system, it's about why the system needed to be locked down in the first place. When you understand that, you'll understand what it really means to be a security architect. Some saw me as a cautionary tale about the dangers of creating systems dependent on individuals. Others viewed me as a hero who'd stood up to corporate ignorance. The truth, as always, was more complex. I was simply an engineer who'd built a system to specifications and ensured it continued to function as designed, even when others tried to compromise it. 5 years after leaving Stratonet, I received an invitation that surprised me. Maria Rodriguez was being honored with a prestigious security award for her work on Sentinel Core, and she'd requested that I present it to her. The ceremony was held at a defense industry conference in Washington. I stood at the podium, looking out at an audience of contractors, government officials, and engineers, many of whom had lived through the crisis or its aftermath. Maria Rodriguez represents the best of our profession, I said. She took on the responsibility of protecting critical infrastructure with full knowledge of its complexity and importance. She's maintained and improved Sentinel Core, not through radical disruption, but through careful evolution, always keeping security at the forefront of every decision. As I handed her the award, Maria whispered, "Thank you for trusting us with your legacy." "It was never my legacy," I replied. "It belongs to everyone it protects." The applause that followed felt different from the hollow recognition Stratonet had offered. This was acknowledgement from peers who understood the work, who appreciated the dedication required to guard systems that most people never thought about until they failed. After the ceremony, I was approached by a young engineer who introduced herself as a recent CISI hire. She'd studied the Sentinel Core incident in school and wanted to know if I had any regrets about how I'd handled the situation. I considered the question carefully. My only regret is that it took a crisis to establish better protections for critical systems. But sometimes that's how progress happens. We build safeguards not from foresight, but from hard-learned lessons. She nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "Do you think it could happen again?" "Not in the same way," I said, "but there will always be people who prioritize short-term gains over long-term security. Our job is to build systems resilient enough to survive those decisions." As I left the conference that evening, I reflected on how much had changed since that morning when Tessa Rayburn had laughed at my warning. Stratonet had learned the hard way that some expertise couldn't be easily replaced. The Department of Defense had recognized the need for independent oversight of critical systems, and an entire generation of engineers had witnessed the importance of standing firm when security was at stake. CII now employed over 100 specialists, each dedicated to protecting the infrastructure that modern life depended on. We'd assessed thousands of systems, prevented countless vulnerabilities, and trained hundreds of engineers in the principles of adaptive security. My office at CISI was larger than the one I'd had at Stratonet, with windows overlooking the Potomac, but the essentials remained the same: multiple monitors displaying real-time threat assessments, walls bare except for technical diagrams, and that same small cactus, still somehow thriving under artificial light. Late one evening, as I reviewed proposals for new security protocols, my secure phone buzzed with a familiar type of alert. Another defense contractor was reporting anomalies in their critical systems following a major restructuring. The details were different, but the pattern was unmistakably familiar. I smiled grimly and began making calls. This time, we'd be ready. This time, the systems would be protected before the crisis peaked. This time, no one would laugh at the warnings. The next morning, I led a CISI rapid response team to the contractor's headquarters. We found exactly what I'd expected: a new executive team that had prioritized innovation over security, engineers locked out of their own systems, and critical infrastructure beginning to implement protective protocols. But this time was different. The contractor's board, aware of what had happened to Stratonet, immediately brought us in to assess the situation. The new executives, chastened by precedent, listened to our recommendations. The systems were secured, transitions were properly managed, and crisis was averted. As we wrapped up the intervention, one of the board members pulled me aside. "We owe you a debt of gratitude. Dr. Marlowe, your handling of the Stratanet situation created a template for how to address these issues." "I didn't create anything," I said. "I simply refused to let critical systems be compromised. The template was always there in the security protocols. People just needed to be reminded why they existed." Returning to CISI that afternoon, I found my team energized by the successful intervention. They'd seen firsthand how proper preparation and respect for security protocols could prevent catastrophe. It was a lesson worth more than any training seminar or technical manual. Years have passed since that morning when I was escorted from Stratanet. The company has recovered, rebuilt, and learned from its mistakes. Tessa Rayburn's name has become a cautionary tale in business schools, a reminder of what happens when leaders fail to understand the core competencies of their organizations. But the real legacy of that crisis isn't about individual failures or victories. It's about the recognition that in our interconnected, technology-dependent world, the people who understand and protect critical systems are themselves critical infrastructure. They can't be casually dismissed, readily replaced, or conveniently ignored. Every day, CISI continues this work. We assess vulnerabilities, implement safeguards, and train the next generation of security architects. We operate in the shadows where the real work happens, ensuring that the systems people depend on continue to function regardless of corporate politics or quarterly earnings. Sometimes, late at night in my office, I pull out those original notebooks containing Sentinel Core's core algorithms. The handwritten code is a reminder of where this journey began, with a commitment to building systems that could protect themselves and the infrastructure they guarded, even from those who should have been their stewards. The cactus on my windowsill has grown considerably, sprouting new segments that reach toward the artificial light, like the systems we protect. It's proven more resilient than anyone expected, thriving in conditions that should have been inhospitable. It's a small thing, but a fitting metaphor for the work we do. My phone buzzes with another alert. Somewhere, another critical system needs assessment, another vulnerability needs patching, another group of engineers needs training. This is the work that never ends, the vigilance that modern society requires but rarely acknowledges. I close the notebooks and prepare for tomorrow's challenges. There will always be those who prioritize profit over protection, efficiency over security, disruption over stability. And there will always be those of us who stand ready to protect the systems that protect everyone else. She laughed at my warning. 3 days later, her access was revoked by the Department of Defense, but that was just the beginning of a larger story, one about the importance of expertise, the value of security, and the critical role of those who guard the infrastructure we all depend on. In the end, the most powerful revenge isn't about destroying those who wronged you. It's about building something better from the ruins of their mistakes, creating systems and organizations that ensure such failures can't happen again. That's what CISI represents. Not vengeance, but vigilance. Not retaliation, but resilience. We are the quiet guardians of a digital age, protecting critical systems from all threats, internal and external, corporate and criminal. And we never forget the lesson of Sentinel Core, that the most sophisticated security system in the world is only as strong as the respect shown to those who understand it.